So whereas previously we've ended up just outputting a single bit of JSON data here, so just two pieces, the code and the price, the next stage that we want to do is we want to try to make this a little more complex. That is, we want to include maybe a specific piece of data, or we might want to include something whereby we have all of this stuff here, all of these lines for one individual company, right? Which is going to change the way that we need to structure things. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to copy all of our toJSON.py, and we're going to put it into another file here, another .py file, which is going to be originally named toJSON2. And we're going to just ditch some working that we had here, some working out which you won't have. And what we want to do is we want to say, well, instead of selecting code and price, why don't we want to select all of it from tracker? And let's see what this does. And of course this breaks it because there's too many items of data here. So it's now trying to pull each one of these rows and each one of these columns, and it's not really sure of how it can go about turning this into something meaningful, right? Because there's too much data here, particularly for this line here, for the dict, which is just expecting little bits of data here. Well, let's try to simplify our code a little bit, where we might pull a specific company here. In this case, we might pull CSL. Right? So just note here that I've got this. Select star from tracker where the code is equal to CSL. Just note that I've got CSL here within these, and we'll see what we get out of this one. All right, so the same thing as before, but you'll note that our data down here has changed significantly. Now this is still a tuple, and yet it's within a list, and this is because we're using this fetch all. Now let's say that we are doing something where we just want a single company here of CSL, but we can change this fetch all to fetch one, and we'll see what this looks like before it breaks again. All right, and you'll see that now it's got rid of the square brackets that used to be around that, because whereas fetch all brings you a list of tuples, fetch one just gives you a single tuple with a whole stack of data here. Now, the problem that we're getting is that when it comes to this stock dict equals dict price tup, right, the price tup contains all of this stuff here, but it doesn't actually have any keys in it. And this is a little bit of a problem, because what dict is expecting is two pieces of data here. So to get around this, we're going to need to do something that's a little bit different. We're going to need to grab a hold of the tables. So, the column names, I should say. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to change SQL query after we've used it once, so that we are going to select name from pragma table info, and we want to specify the table that we're getting it from. And we might specify with our double brackets, double quotation marks here. So what this is doing is when you select name from pragma table info tracker, it's pulling in all of the column names, in this case ID, code, name, price, etc, etc. So what we can do is we can say, hey, we're getting all of this data here, and we're going to pair it with these as our keys. So how does this work in reality? Well, first we need to execute our SQL query, and whereas before we have this price tup, well, now we're going to have something called headers. This is going to be equal to c.fetchAll, and we're going to see what this looks like. So we're just going to print out our headers, and we're going to run. So see that I have a whole series of tuples here, because again I did the fetch all. So I have a list packed with tuples, but I now have ID, which goes with 10, code, which goes with CSL, name, which goes with CSL limited, etc, etc. So what we want to do next is we want to take this and flatten it out. Instead of it being in one list with a whole stack of tuples, we want to just turn it into one bigger list. So instead of this print header here, I'm going to make the same variable here. And I'm going to say, hey, I want you to go and grab each one of these items within header, and I want you to flatten it out so that it becomes a single list. So just note what we have here, where we have a tuple with only one item in it, and another tuple with one item in it, and it's all within a list. Well, now when I go right click run, you'll see that now it's all within one list, which is much more useful for us when it comes to us doing this as a dictionary. So we now have our value, we now have our key. The next thing we need to do is make sure that we've massaged this so that it converts our key value pair into a dictionary. And to do this, in fact, we're going to ditch our print headers over here as well. And to do this, we're going to put another function here within our dict call, and this is something called zip. And what the zip does is it's going to zip these two things together, and it's going to associate ID with 10. So we're going to zip together our headers and our price tuple. And we're going to see what we get out of this one now. All right, and you'll see now that this one was much happier working its way through. And if we go back and have a look at the various print statements that we have here, so we firstly print our tuple for of the prices. Remember that we're just fetching one of them in this instance. The next thing that we print is our stock dictionary, which is here when it's all done and dusted. You'll see that you've got your value with the key, sorry, other way around, key with the value, key, value. Then we dump it here into a JSON format. Now, depending on what you have with your version of PyCharm or whatever other IDE you're using, I can select this line here. I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to create a new file. I'm going to call this csl.json. And you'll see that when I paste it into here, as long as I have my line correct and I get PyCharm to format it for me automatically, you'll see that this looks like perfectly valid JSON data. So we know that at least we're getting it out here into something that makes sense.